Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Storytime episode. This is for our session that we had last night, which was the 30th of October. This is actually the first game that we had patrons sit in on the game and be able to see and interact and ask questions afterwards. We were going to do that last weekend, but something ended up coming up last moment, and we just weren't able to play, unfortunately. But we did continue our game as of last night, and some really fun things happened. But if you want to get in on that early access, you could call it, or just being able to sit in on the game as it is in its most raw form before we turn it into a series, then this is some of your last few chances, because we're kind of getting to the end of our first chapter here. Then we're going to take a break. We're probably going to cleanse our palate, because we've been playing since January this game. So we're going to cleanse our palates a bit, maybe play a couple sessions of a different game. Maybe we'll record that. I don't know. Maybe that I just got a really good idea. I'll save that for later. I just got a really good idea, but we'll get back to that. But this will be your last chance to really sit in on the last few episodes of this before it turns into a series. And it was a lot of fun because a lot of really important stuff happened. So let's just but if you want to sit in on that, go to patreon.com/OSWguild. Any support there will get you a private invite, and it's not like you have to continue supporting. You just do a one-time thing, and we'll get you an invite for the next two, which should be the last two sessions. We'll see, because last night actually went a lot faster than I was expecting, and that sometimes happens. Sometimes you, as a GM, prepare enough content that will last potentially two sessions, and it lasts one or a half, and you're like, well, I wasn't prepared past this, let's wing it, which is actually a lot of fun sometimes. But then there's also the times where you'll prepare something that you think will take a week, and then it ends up taking 4 or 5, and you're like, oh gosh, this is dragging on way too long. Sometimes that happens, and that's okay. I think that's the most important part to know, is that's okay, because you just as long as you know your world and what's going on in your world, then you can wing it pretty good. That said, we did continue on last night from right where we'd left off. They started back on the ship after having a pretty nice dinner with Caitlin and meeting some characters that are, or a character that is from Star Wars Bloodline, which is a fantastic book. I would highly suggest it. And they had a lot of conversations with Caitlin, including telling her all about the stuff that they've found on Ord Mantell, including all the underground stuff, the things that they believe are linked with the First Order, and just generally speaking, anything that they've been investigating outside of the Great Hunt. And that was a little eye-opening, because Caitlin didn't know any of it. And of course, she tells her friend, which is a part of the Resistance, and there's a small little conversation there, but then they all head back to the ship, and Alask, being the smuggler of the group, the Han Solo of the group, has a small moment, and has been kind of building up to this moment with Caitlin for a while before they eventually get themselves some privacy as the rest of the party falls asleep and is ready for the new day, which is where we started, is that new day. Caitlin, out in the main part of the ship, kind of like the communal area, is hanging out. It appears she had passed out upon, trying to do something in the ship. It looks like she was trying to make some kind of breakfast, but failed doing so, where Venator, who is a droid and doesn't need sleep, shows up just shortly thereafter with some coffee, or as it's called in the Star Wars universe, some calf. And that was really kind of nice, because it brought everybody out from their rooms and into the main area of the ship, where they started kind of having a discussion of, okay, well, when is this bounty going to start? Because we're on the final round. And Caitlin says, oh, about that, I need to get back to the office. It's supposed to start today. Show up in a couple hours. Okay, thanks, bye. And shares a little moment with Alask before running off and going away, which gives the players time to react. And I don't do this often, but I did this time because it was important to do it. I did the video game trope, where you see it in things like Tomb Raider, right? Where you get to a certain part towards the end of the game where it's like, this is the end of the game. Do everything you want to do before going forward, because you won't have a chance to do it after that. Things will be set in motion and you can't go back after that. I kind of gave them that spiel of do everything that you want to do now, because upon starting this final bounty, it's going to lead to a chain reaction of stuff that is going to end this chapter of our story. We are at the end of our story now that they have finished this bounty. We'll get to how they did that, but I needed to make that very clear right up front, and that set the stakes, because now they know, okay, now we need to prepare, and let's go over our mental checklist of anybody who's on the planet that we need to talk to. No, Guruk, our awesome patron over at the nightclub that they visit fairly frequently, has already left planet because he feels like the planet is not safe to be on, and that's really important for the players to understand that there's people on the planet that are like, no, this place is not cool anymore, and have left. So he's not there. Nobody else that they know aside from Caitlin that they care about are on the planet that they need to talk to, really. Maybe Nissa is probably a good one to talk to, but she's kind of hard to get a hold of because she's like perpetually stealthing around at this point, trying to remain hidden. So they get their stuff together, they arm themselves, and they say, okay, now we're ready for this bounty. They don't know what to expect, so they head over to Vex's office. Vex seems, as they walk in, very excited, where Caitlin is just being her normal smiley self, a little more glowing than usual, but still smiling self. And Vex leads the players up into the strategizing room, or the ready room in their little office that they've made, and they pull up a dossier of a hutt. And Vex keeps going on, and she's like, oh, your target is Timo the Hutt. He's on Tatooine. He lives in Mos Shuta. He has a palace in Mos Shuta. You could probably find him there. That's usually where he's at. And yeah, that's your bounty. But the players are like, oh my gosh, Timo the Hutt, Mos Shuta? No. And Vex is like, what? You guys seem really excited about this. What's going on? And the players, without describing it, they just like, yeah, we got it. We got this. This is awesome. We're excited. We're gonna go as soon as possible. Okay, bye. And they start leaving, and and Alask shares a moment on the way out the door, giving Caitlin a wink, and then Cookie, trying to crowd his space, also tries to give Caitlin a wink, fails his charm roll, and starts drooling all over the place, which is very Cookie-like. But they end up walking out of the office, and then that's when kind of the excitement hits the party of, I can't believe this is happening. And to catch you up on that, this is the beginning of the game. When our very first session, I took a lot of the ideas from the starter game as a beginner game, which has to deal back, for Edge of the Empire, that is. It deals with Timo the Hutt on Mos Shuta, and there's like this thing. But I took those characters because it was my first time ever being a DM or playing any tabletop game like this at all. So I took those characters to utilize them so I didn't have to make my own. Turns out it actually worked out quite well, because hutts live very long, so the chances of that hutt still being alive during the time that the players are alive, which is the Force Awakens timeline, is fairly likely, unless he got himself killed. But he didn't, because he kind of existed after the time of Jabba the Hutt, when the power struggle on Tatooine was happening. And what ends up happening is the players, when they first started, they got a mission, and they had been working with Timo before, which is how they had their ship to begin with. They bought their ship off of him by doing work. And they move on. They do this mission, which they find out Timo the Hutt's working for a group called the First Order. They find a guy who is a recent addie to Tatooine. He's been there keeping an eye on Timo the Hutt. And long story short, they end up being found out, and they try to escape Mos Shuta, and they do so successfully, but not without Timo the Hutt putting a bounty on their head, which leads to a couple things down the line. It leads to a bounty hunter trying to kill them or take them in when they first go to Ryloth, which is where they first picked up Doc, who is played by Six Pounder. And then later on, Alask's old crew show up and this is before he was ever with the players as they are now. They show up and try to claim that bounty as well. So this bounty's kind of been looming over their head, and they haven't wanted to go back to Tatooine except for one reason, which was when they found that guy who was part of the resistance who ended up dying on or in his little camp. He had a stashed away X-Wing, but they couldn't ever get it because they didn't have a docking bay on their ship, which is something that you actually can install on a YT 1300 cruiser, so the Millennium Falcon. It does take up some of the storage space, but you can fit 2 starfighters in there. Like, it's a good amount of space. So you can fit like an X-Wing and, let's just say, for the sake of it, a snowspeeder, because that's what they have. They have a snowspeeder currently, which they got from their very first bounty. Long story on that one too. But that will come back around for today's story time. And so when they leave the office, they know kind of what they're getting into. They know that Timo the Hutt was where they first began, and they're all kind of excited because they know that this is close to the end of this chapter and the story is ending where it began, and they're excited for that, which is all that I could ever hope for. Because at the very beginning of them leaving Tatooine and all that, I had no idea what the plan was. And then I quickly came up with an idea for a plot, and then I fleshed it out. And I fleshed out the story arc of like what would be happening in the galaxy and how the players could or could not affect it. And if they did affect it, what would that change down the line? But I knew at the very end of all this, the last bounty given would be Timo the Hutt. And to have that be my plan all along, and then to finally, after like almost a year, finally give that to the players, it was so rewarding from a game master perspective. I loved it. But what they did is they quickly go back to the ship. They get on the ship because they know that they are fighting another bounty hunter for this bounty. And Timo the Hutt is wanted dead. So most of their other bounties were dead or alive or just alive. This is the first one that's, we want him dead. And the players know that somehow someone, I should say, has been changing what the Great Hunt is all about and manipulating it for their own purposes. And they've tried to get to the bottom of that. So the fact that Timo the Hutt is the final bounty and is where this all kind of started. They don't think that there's a connection, but there might be. It's kind of what they said. Like, it's too coincidental to not consider. So on the trip over, which hyperspace in Star Wars is not actually represented accurately in the Star Wars universe itself. In all the source material, it says hyperspace over long courses. So like, from Ord Mantell, which is near the core, to Tatooine, is actually a couple weeks in space that you're in hyperspace for. But you don't see that in the movies because that would be really boring, just being on space or in a spaceship for a couple weeks. And they want to move the story along, so they don't show that time pass. But they're on their ship for a couple weeks. By the time they get to Tatooine, they're all planned up. They came up with a plan, and basically their plan involved first landing on the outskirts of Mashuta and finding that X-Wing, and they did. There were a couple Jawas that moved into to that little place. They can tell because of the junk on the outside. And Alask, just by himself, walks right in. The Jawas start freaking out. He walks up over to this locked door that leads into a hangar that clearly the Jawas have not been able to get into, and he just opens it up real quick. The Jawas are astounded. They're a little confused, astounded, and then kind of angry that this guy is in their home of what they see it as, although they stole it from, whoever the last owner was. They don't know. And he gets into the ship, fires it up, and just takes off and opens up like these hangar bay doors, which have sand over them at this point. So like the sand falls in, and these poor Jawas are like, what just happened? That was what? And they fly the ship over to the X-Wing over to their ship. They put it in, and then they land on one of the more inconspicuous landing pads in Mashuta. They go through, and their whole plan here was brilliant. I wasn't actually expecting this plan, but it worked out really well because I was going for a Return of the Jedi vibe when they go and free Han Solo, that kind of thing. But I wasn't expecting the players to pick up on that, and they did. But with their plan, unfortunately, was cooler than what I had already set up. And what I mean by that is Timo the Hutt knew that they were coming. And Timo the Hutt knew that he had a bounty on his head. How did he know this? Well, spoilers for the end of this story. He knew all about the bounties and everything being rigged because he was involved in that. And he knows that the people behind it are now coming for him because they want to tie up loose ends. So he has bunkered himself in his palace in the basement in what is essentially a panic room that he built purposely for this very moment that might happen. He had a feeling it would happen one day, and certainly it's coming to that. So he built this place specifically for that, this bunker. So he's in there waiting for the bounty hunters to show up because he has an elaborate trap that he's going to spring and try to kill them all. So that way he can kind of get away on his own and not have these great hunt bounty hunters following him, which would be very dangerous for him. So the players have come up with this idea to get in because they don't know yet. Their idea is to have a couple of the players, because you got to remember Venator used to be Waxium, and that was another droid, but he transferred his basic programming and memories and everything into this other droid, which was his original body to begin with. Long story there. So he looks different. Then they have this guy named Doc, who's another Twi'lek, who wasn't there to begin with. So now there's two people that are not familiar to Timo or anyone in Mashuta. And then they kind of come up with this idea that there's a traitor in the group, and that traitor is Gand, because he's a bounty hunter, and has decided to take the other two people, which is Alask and Cookie the Wookiee, as bounties into Timo the Hutt's palace and say, hey, we know that we had bounties on our heads to begin with. I'm giving you these two for payment, and we'll leave you alone for the Great Hunt. That's their idea on how to get into the palace. And I think that's brilliant. It's actually well thought out, and it would work pretty much on every situation. And what ends up happening is they're walking their way through the city with, people handcuffed, with Alask and Cookie handcuffed. They rigged the handcuffs to be able to break in the middle when the time was right. And that was a mechanics check that they did. They're on their way over to the palace when they walk past a guard, and Alask notices that the guard, as soon as they walk past, calms in. And what he hears is that, because he's speaking in Huttese, he's a Gamoran. That's what they do on Tatooine. He's coming into someone, but he says they're here and to be prepared. So instantly the party's like, well, crap. Well, they know that we're here, so maybe we should rethink this. So they get the front gates of the palace, and they walk in. The door is ajar. There's normally two guards out there. Door is ajar. They walk in, and the guards that aren't there kind of get them really cautious, and they should have been very cautious, which is kind of the reason why I obscured those guards. But as they walk into basically the lobby of Timo's palace, they see three Gamoran guards who kind of are at the ready, and the players walk in and they're like, well, let's keep up our shtick. And they do. One of the Gamorans says that they were expected, and that Timo's been waiting for him. And what was going to happen next was these three guards were going to attack. But it was right before they go to attack that the players swiftly say, oh, yes, of course he was waiting for us. And this is Gand saying this. Of course he was waiting for us, because I calmed in and told him that I'm bringing these two idiots in as bounties. And it's at that point that Alask spits on Gand. And this whole thing leads to, Gand turning and slapping Alask across the face and trying to make it really real that these guys are being brought in. And that all leads to a lot of boosts being added to the roll for deception here. And they make the roll. They make the roll and it passes. So the guards are deceived. They think that, okay, maybe this is actually the way this was going down now. And they're Gamorreans. They have an intellect of 1 in my game. So they're not the smartest bunch, but they are powerful guards. So they open up the doors to move on, and the players just whoop right through. They close the door behind them, and now they're in the palace. Now they feel like they can just move as quickly as possible. So they start walking down like this long curved corridor that's really opulent and nice and everything, because it leads into this palace that is basically the new hotspot on Tatooine, if you can have one. So they walk in, they go down this corridor, and then they see a body. And they run over to the body and they look, and the body has like half of its arm blown off and everything. And they've been expecting, or suspecting rather, that the person they're against in this round is Talon, another bounty hunter. And they found her, and they've gone against her at the beginning of the hunt. On their very first bounty they did for the Great Hunt, she was the competition. And her whole thing is she likes to sneak around, and she likes to be unseen and be in the shadows. So she'll sneak into a place, kill anyone that she needs to, knock others out, and then kind of get her target and take them out stealthily. Almost very Dishonored-like, but I made that character long before I started the Dishonored series, but that's what she does. And with that in mind, the players see that this guy is taken out, know that the guards out front were not alerted to anything, but this guy clearly has been kind of demolished by like a small explosive, maybe a mine, they discern. And this is their chance. They're like, okay, we gotta go. So they just start booking it. And sure enough, they keep running down the hallway. They go up a little small set of stairs, which opens up into this really grand area that the Hutt Timo himself would normally be sitting at, kind of like a Jabba's palace thing, but much bigger. And it's almost like an amphitheater, because it goes down, and in the middle has a dancing area for all of his Twi'lek dancers that he has, and there's a ton of like nice tables and stuff for like dinners that people set up. So this place is a little less savage than Jabba's palace. It's a little bit more opulent, and they run up to that area. They see a Kowankian monkey lizard, and Cookie runs over to it because he wants to take it as a pet. But I set that up as an encounter, and I wasn't expecting Cookie to want it as a pet, it worked out really well because he picked it up and the thing bit him and started making a ton of noise, and then Cookie heard a ton of skittering coming around, and all of a sudden all of these monkey lizards pop up out of nowhere, and nobody else is in here. Clearly the palace, they've noticed, has been locked down, or that is closed and is just being guarded. So all these monkey lizards pop up, and they start doing that stupid laugh from episode 4, and they start attacking Cookie, but Cookie's armor is just way too strong, and they can't do anything. They literally can't do any damage to him, because everything that they normally would do would just be soaked by his amount of soak that he has and everything. So he turns, it's his turn to attack. He turns and he tries to do his special hired gun ability, which is a retardedly overpowered ability, but basically he can do it once per session. He has to spend 2 destiny points, which is quite the price to pay, to allow him to kill every single minion in an encounter, and just one-shot them all, just in one foul swoop. Now, he tries to do that. It's the first time he's ever used it, and unfortunately, it failed. He wasn't allowed to do it because he failed the roll. There is a roll that he has to make for it. And with that, the monkey lizards go again, can't do anything, so he just decides to turn, and there's a ton of them in front of him, so he just takes his axe and cleaves them all, and just kills like 6 of them straight off. And there's like 3 of them behind him, so he turns back to them and just roars at them. And at this point, they know they aren't doing anything to this Wookiee. They just got slaughtered. They're semi-intelligent creatures, so they all kind of look at each other and then skitter off and run. And Cookie's like, well, that was a waste of time. Like, I wanted a pet, but that's not how that was going to work. So he runs back over to the rest of the players. The rest of the players are like, what the heck, dude? What was that all about? He's like, just don't ask. And they open up this door that leads upstairs and downstairs. Half of the party runs upstairs. They find kind of a concubine area where there's a lot of Twi'lek rooms that they have set up that look like maybe rooms that patrons would also go to that visit this like palace, if you want to call it that at that point, because it's more like a fancy kind of dirty casino where people who have the money might get invited up to these places to maybe woo more out of them money wise. And then, you know, they also find Timo's room, but nothing's there. There's no sign of him. So the other party that's run downstairs, they run in and they see two other bodies down in this basement area. And the other party shows up. They rejoin, and Gand makes a successful kind of tracking check, and he's able to determine where Timo has gone just by like looking at the slime patterns on the ground. And sure enough, it follows where these bodies have gone, where it's straight down a corridor past like two big old blast doors that they go through. And they walk through the first blast door. It opens up. It leads into kind of like a small containment area that you would see like on a ship. Then they open up the second blast door, and what they see in front of them is a giant blue force field wall, probably about 30, or actually more like 60 to 70 feet ahead of them in this large room with kind of like a couple pillars in the middle. And in front of them is also Talon. They recognize Talon right off the bat, but her back is to them. She's looking at this wall, and as they look through the force wall, this like giant force field, they see Timo the Hutt on the other side with a Twi'lek on the inside, and in front of this wall are 3, or actually 4 Gamoran guards, and it looks like Talon was about to start taking out these guards, but that's when the players show up. So they run into the room, and as they do that, the door shuts behind them as Timo pushes a button and locks them in and starts laughing. Talon hears this. She turns around. She's surprised, and Gand uses his grapple hook, which is a gadget he has, to grapple her and pull her to them from across the room. It works. She manages to get ensnared by this, and as she's coming at the players from being pulled, she gets to Gand and just is trying to say, like, wait, stop. Like, we need to work together. And the players already are taking their actions. They're taking shots at these Gamorans, and everything has just kind of like launched into chaos. And it does launch into a very long combat session, which took up, like, the first part was probably like 45 minutes getting to this. This took another 2 hours, 2.5 hours on average to finish this crazy little room that I had set up. And this was Timo's elaborate trap. He knew that these bounty hunters would be coming for him. He knew that if he put enough supplies into a panic room, he would be able to outlast anyone that could come into here. And he knew that if he designed a wall specifically for keeping something in, almost like a prison, with no discernible way of opening it or deactivating it from the outside, then he would be fine. That was his big game plan here. So he set up this giant trap room. The first was to have guards, and these Gamoran guards were just to make sure that they were the first line of defense. And if they could do it, then awesome. If not, he had backup plans. And sure enough, some of those backup plans could have been discovered earlier, but the players rushed in straight ahead, thinking that Talon, which in their first bounty, I might add, beat them to the target and tried to take him out sneakily, but they caught her in the process. So they were expecting the same thing to happen here, but now they're stuck in this room with Talon, with these Gamorans, and with Timo behind this giant wall. So the Gamorans start charging, the players take their shots and deal with the Gamoran guards, all 4 of them, very rapidly. But on Cookie's turn, before any of them had really died, he couldn't get to them because he's a melee character. He couldn't get to them quite yet. So he runs into the middle of the room and just roars and tries to intimidate them. And he succeeds. He does kind of make them scared. So when it came to their turn, they ran off and around. They tried to avoid the Wookiee. Which was good because the Wookiee does end up on his turn running behind one of the pillars where one of them is cowering and just like finishing one off that had been shot earlier. And that led the Gamoran that was next to him to just run, to book it back over to the force wall to like beg for his way in. But by the time he got to the wall, it had done a full round. The rest of the Gamorreans had all died, and it's just this one left against this force wall. So Cookie runs up, can't quite reach him because of his movement. He's like a couple tiles off on our battle map, so he can't actually attack. So he just roars. And again, because the first one was successful and this one was successful, and the Gamorrean's friends all died, he just passes out. He's just like, he's done. He doesn't want to fight. He's scared. He's like legitimately scared. So he just knocks out. And the players are like, oh, well, that's fine. And then Timo just starts laughing again. And it's at this point that Gand has an opportunity to, and he had earlier in the fight when dealing with the Gamorreans, shot Talon with a sleeping dart. It did put her to sleep. And then as soon as the Gamorreans were dead and they had a feeling something else was about to happen, Venator ran over to Talon and like slapped her awake. And she was like, really? Why did you knock me out? We need to work together. And as she's saying that, the people in the room all start hearing noises in these like giant blast doors that are in the room with them. And she's like, because of the noise that I heard earlier, I was about to take care of it when you guys ran in. And that's when Timo pushes a button and the blast doors open up, and 4 large battle droids walk out into the room. And another battle ensues. Now the players are having to deal with these 4 droids. Now Talon is awake, and she's trying to help because she's stuck in this room too. So she throws a proximity mine, which the players gathered she was using from the bodies earlier. Throws one underneath the droid, does a significant amount of damage. And then one of the other players, Alask, uses a item he has. He has like this sludge that he can spray, and it turns into concrete. He picked that up like back when they were on Nar Shaddaa one time. It's this cool little trinket, and he uses it on one of them, and it succeeds in basically stopping it for 10 minutes. It's essentially covered in concrete for 10 minutes until this stuff wears off. So they disable one of the droids, and then they start fighting 2 of them. One of them gets a pretty good shot off on Gand and takes half of his HP away in one hit. So they're like, okay, these things are no joke. We need to kill these as soon as possible. It gets to Venator's turn, and he's kind of the computers guy. And he says, can I hack these? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, they're droids. You have these little remote droids that you have fly around and provide defense for people, little shields. So why not? You have a data pad that you use to communicate with these remote droids. Why not use the remote droids to try to hack into these larger droids and see what you can do? And he succeeds on a roll, and what happens is one of these 4 droids, the red light on it just switches blue and then starts walking elsewhere. And he's like, well, I have no idea what that means. I thought I was going to be able to hack it, be able to tell it what to do. And it's like, sorry, that's not necessarily how the hacking rules work, but that's what happens. So you'll just have to find out what happens. And the rest of the players go. They manage to bring down one of the droids. So now, technically, there's 1 remaining if this one got hacked. And they go through an entire round of combat again. It gets to Venator's turn, and the droid goes on its own on Venator's turn. It tries to move closer to the combat because it's out of range. And they don't quite understand what's going on yet. And in the next round of combat, they kill the final droid. There's the one in the concrete. They're like, that's there for like another 8 minutes. We should be good on that one. Now we can deal with the force wall. So they go, Alask in particular, runs over to the wall, tries to inspect it, tries to find a way in. No discernible weaknesses. Looks like there's not really a way in. And during this time, he's been shouting to this Twi'lek that's in there that looks kind of like a slave, almost, think Slave Leia. That's kind of what I was going for. I was, like I said at the beginning, I was going for like a Return of the Jedi thing. And they picked up on those vibes. So he's trying to convince her to open the shield, that they'll let her go, just open the shield. And there was a successful charm check, but it didn't seem to do anything. She just looked kind of confused in the situation. So it was more or less just let's see what happens. Like, maybe she's going to go for it. Maybe she's not. And it's at this point that he tries again. The droids are now dead. They've taken care of the Gamorreans. It looks like a couple of the phases are done here. So he's calling out to her, like, open the shield. She's not having it. She's looking kind of confused, looking kind of scared because she's locked in with Timo the Hutt, who does have weapons on him. So she's probably fearing for her life at this point. And then the players are kind of looking around, and they hear a noise in the back of the room as it's almost like a small gate opening, and then they start seeing, or Gand in particular, because he's back in that area, starts seeing a ton of little creatures run through into the room. And that was when Timo hit another button. He opened this gate, and these creatures start running in, and one of the creatures recognizes them as act dogs. And these things, there's about 10 of them that are all running in. They're fairly small. They're not like large ones, but it's clear that they were being bred in this other room, that this little tiny gate allowed them into this room. Like he obviously, Timo set these up. And if the players had explored earlier before just running into this room, they would have found this room with all of these act dogs in it and may have been able to take them out then. But they didn't do that. And that's good because it made for this encounter to be a lot more interesting, because this was certainly what was planned if they hadn't. Now, if they had taken them out, and then they walked in, and then Timo hit this button and nothing came out, it would have been a pretty funny moment of like realizing, oh crap, like maybe the dogs are just distracted. I don't know. He would have tried to like lure them out. No, nothing would have happened. They would have moved on to the next part. But it would have been this awkward thing for Timo of him being like, why isn't this button working? But they do take care of him. In fact, they throw a grenade, and it takes out, it weakens several of them. And then the droid gets to go when it's on Venator's turn, and he shoots into the crowd and does a ton of damage and kills the rest of the act dogs. And you're like, okay, cool. That's another phase down. That happened within 2 rounds of combat. That was very good. The act dogs didn't even get to do any damage. And the players feeling pretty confident, looking over at Timo, who just has a giant grin on his face. And they're all very suspicious. What's about to happen? He goes over to a console, and again, he pushes some more buttons. And that's when the players notice that these nozzles that are up on these pillars start spewing out some green gas. And the gas, as it comes out of the nozzles, start like burning away at the stone around it. And it looks like it's eating away. So the players know that it's not just poison, so people like Gand, who doesn't breathe because he doesn't have lungs, which is a weird thing, but that's just how his character is, and Venator, who is a droid, so he doesn't breathe, actually are susceptible to this because it can burn away their skin, or it can burn away their parts. It can like kill them still. So this is what initiates a skill challenge. Now, skill challenges were added back in 4th edition D&D, and I've seen them used since, and I really like them, so I wanted to add one, which is basically a skill challenge of them trying to escape a room that is filling with this caustic poison. And the idea behind it is pretty simple. They have to use their skills to overcome what's happening in the room. And it's a challenge in the way that if they fail 3 times cumulatively, so like if one fails once, another fails twice, that's 3 times, then it automatically fails and they all die. But they all get one final, very difficult resilience check to see if like maybe one of them could survive and get out just at the last moment. So they know the stakes. I tell them at the beginning, I tell them the rules of this. If you get 3 failures, you lose, and you need 6 successes to win. And the way you get 6 or a success is you use one of your skills in a clever way to try to stop this poison. And you can only use skills that you are trained in. So in this case, like on their character sheet, they know that because they've put little checkboxes to that, which means that when they use XP to upgrade those skills, it's a lot cheaper than if they didn't have those. Some of them they've gotten just by being a certain race. Others are because they're a certain class. So they know that they can only use those skills. And then I put, again, the rest of the rules down for this, which is that they can only use that skill once. So that goes per person. So if Venator wanted to use a computer's check, he couldn't use another one whether or not it was successful. He only gets one chance at it. Whereas, Doc could also use a computer's check if he was skilled in it. It's not limited to one person. It's just limited by that amount of times that one person can have. So again, Venator could only do it once, but Doc could also do it once. This means that the people who are trained in those skills get to use their skills and get to do cool things with those skills, but they aren't also just rolling through the entire skill challenge being like, this is the thing I'm best at, computers, 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 and just doing that for every role. It also varies it up and makes the players have to think. So on top of that, so they know that 3 failures is a fail. They know that 6 successes is how they win this. They know that, you know, their skills can only really be used once, and that the skill will only do one thing, but will also, you know, consider it a success. So, for example, and these are the examples I gave them because this is the first time they've ever encountered this, is that they could use like coordination to pull one of the boxes over in the room to get high enough up onto the box and reach the nozzle to try to clog it. Or they could use ranged light, which is like their ranged attack, to try to shoot one of them to disable it. But if they shot it, they knew that they had a chance of breaking it open, making it worse for them. And then finally, they could use like leadership to try to stay calm and try to order certain people to do very specific things that would count as a success. So those are the things that I gave them, and they instantly jumped on it as I started the timer because they have 5 minutes to do it. And surprisingly, they finished with like 25 seconds left. So that tells you that while 5 minutes seems like a long time, it's not when you're considering like, oh, we are having to make these rolls, we're having to consider what rolls we're making, but every player in that moment is so invested in it that while the other ones are figuring out and doing their rolls, they're already trying to list what they're going to do next. So it's this cool little moment where the players are using their skills. Like Venator used his computer skill to talk to the droid to have the droid shoot one of the nozzles, whereas like Alask shot a nozzle with his range stuff, but Cookie tried to use his brawn to jump up and use his athletics to like break one of the nozzles, but he failed 2 rolls in a row. So 2 of his rolls counted as 2 failures. They got down to the point where they needed 1 failure to completely fail or 1 success to succeed. They were at 5 and 2. And it was that last roll that was really tense. They made it, and it succeeded. And it was Venator's roll. He used one of his mechanics checks to jump up with a like a plasma tool and to seal off the last nozzle. And it was this cool little moment where the players like understood the rules. They understood that there was a time limit, and they were all working together to try to get this going, and they were all doing their cool things. And I would highly suggest doing these skill challenges in your games if you're running one, because it worked out really well for us. As long as the players know the rules surrounding it and the parameters, then they know that they're in a mini game and they know that they're going to have a lot of fun with it. That said, I would do it again because it was awesome. But that was the final challenge in this trap room. So Timo, a little defeated, but still understanding that he has all these supplies in his room and that the players are not going to be able to get in here, just starts doing the bad guy monologue like, oh, you guys are fools. You don't understand that you're all pawns to the New Republic. And the players are like, the New Republic? I thought we were pawns to the First Order. And then he starts saying, oh, you don't understand because I was a part of this whole thing. I was the one who was putting in the bounties. I was the one who was finding these people that the New Republic wanted. And, you know, Stanley Solomon, your first guy that you went for, Void Ghosts, we brought him in because the New Republic wanted the special ship alloys and manufacturing that he had access to. And Isaac Owen, who was the guy on Nar Shaddaa, he had a slave trade that the New Republic wanted to leverage. And then Wolf Diedrich, the thermal dynamicist, oh yeah, he was wanted because the New Republic wanted him to make a new war machine or help him make a new war machine for the Republic. And then Dalton, the final bounty that you guys just had, oh, he was wanted just because of Gregory Oswin, which is a New Republic general, wanted his son back before the inevitable purge of Ord Mantell takes place. And the players are like, what the hell? This guy actually does know quite a bit. wait, why the New Republic? I thought I was the First Order. Like they're kind of talking like, wait, what does the New Republic have to do with this? Like we all thought that this was the First Order. And I had to remind them that Nissa, the person who is impersonating Dalton Oswin, the leader of the Shadow Collective, was investigating corruption within the New Republic. And there were talks when they were with Caitlin that Caitlin was also surprised because she knew that there was some kind of corruption in the New Republic, and something had happened a couple of years ago with these Amexine warriors on the Outer Rim that kind of all spoke to that, and Senator Organa, was investigating that kind of thing. So she thinks it's all kind of a part of that, and the players are a little confused. They don't understand why the New Republic is suddenly brought up. They weren't expecting that. It's almost like they're being thrown off the scent, or maybe that they had it all wrong to begin with. So they start kind of asking him, well, like, how do you know this? And he's like, well, the New Republic had me turn away my bounties on you guys once they figured out what was going on, and once they learned that they could use you for the Great Hunt and use you as the fall guys for what was going to happen on Ord Mantell. And the players are like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, there's going to be a purge on Ord Mantell. The New Republic plans on purging it and attacking the Shadow Collective and destroying it once and for all, which is why the Hutts are not wanting to be a part of the Great Hunt or help Dalton when he was requesting it, because they know that once the Shadow Collective is gone, there's going to be a hole there, a giant vacuum of power that the Hutts can then step in and take over these clans and these gangs and everything, and use them and leverage them on their own. And the players are like, well, actually, that kind of makes sense, but it all kind of ties into everything, and that doesn't. We thought that this was all the First Order, but now we're starting to see that no, this is actually a lot of the New Republic doing this. Like, how could that be? Wait, what do you mean we're going to be the fall guys? And he's just like, oh, don't worry, you'll see. I'm going to be safe here. You're not going to be able to get out of this. And when the New Republic inevitably shows up to kill you guys because you haven't done your job, and I'm sitting here in my safe little bunker watching them do it, I will then be able to, using my wit, negotiate with them and get myself out of this. And in a typical bad guy fashion, he's kind of flaunting his superiority in this moment as the players are trapped. They're trapped in this room. They can't just leave. They're literally trapped in this room with him. And he is the one with all the supplies. So they're not going to be able to go anywhere. They're not going to be able to outlast this. They got to figure out a way to get him out of the cell. And it's Venator who starts kind of talking about, oh, don't you understand the kind of devastation that would happen if we destroyed one of your generators in this palace? And he makes a successful check, a deception check, and Team of the Hutt is kind of, his armor is a little weakened there. He's kind of like, wait, what do you mean? I built this place specifically for this. There's no way that you could. And he starts second guessing. And it's when that second guessing happens that the Twi'lek in the cell sees her chance, and she starts seeing that the players have all defeated this challenge. The players are now getting him in a state of emotional weakness and kind of putting him in off of his game. And the Twi'lek takes the chain that she's chained up with, and just like Princess Leia in episode 6, where the whole thing happens on the pleasure barges out in the sands of Tatooine, where she takes the chain and she throws it around the neck of Jabba the Hutt and strangles him. That's exactly what this woman does. She throws it around the neck of this Hutt and starts strangling him. And Team of the Hutt is a little bit stronger than Jabba the Hutt was, and is less just sloth-like, but she does manage to knock him out enough to run over to the button, push it, bring the force field down, and Cookie, who was standing right there, just brings his axe down and cuts off the head of this Hutt. And then gives the head to Gand, who watches this Twi'lek woman run out of the doors that they came in at because she opened them, and they're just like, well, job well done. And they start kind of looking around and making sure that there's nothing of value in this room before they leave. But that is where we ended our game, is taking down Team of the Hutt. Now they have this head. They have Talon unconscious, which is currently over the shoulders of Cookie as they walk out, and they're kind of deciding their next like step that they're going to take. Because they want to turn in this bounty. They're going to get 750,000 credits for doing so. But they also know that whatever is happening with the Great Hunt, whatever they thought was happening may not be happening. You know, is it the New Republic? Is it the First Order? What is going on? They don't know. They have a lot of assumptions that they can make, but they don't really know. And they're going to eventually have to go back and face this, turning in this bounty, or else Talon might get clever and go find another piece that's the body left over and turn it in for herself if they take too long. So there's an interesting time frame that they have to deal with, or to come up with a potential other plot. But that's where we ended our session, and that's kind of where we're in this story time. I'm curious to see what the players are going to do next. I know kind of generally how we're going to end this chapter of the story, and I'm excited to see what happens. Generally speaking, I think that it's going to take 3 more weeks of gameplay for them to reach a conclusion here and to kind of finish off everything I want. But that's thinking that they might take a long time getting back to Ord Mantell. They're going to want to maybe do some investigation. So it's always weird, because they might just go straight back to Ord Mantell, and then it's like, well, the final part of the game is kicking off here before we end this chapter and start episode 2. So it'll be interesting to see nonetheless. But with all of that being said, I hope you enjoyed this story. It's getting interesting. I can't wait for you to see what the end is going to be like and how this all resolves, and maybe the whole New Republic thing was a red herring, and maybe it wasn't. We'll have to find out. But we shall see you guys next time.